of all the cases you've had, you've previously said that another one of the highlights of your career was the prosecution of a man called Dinko Šakić. And I'm wondering, could you tell the listeners who is Dinko Šakić and why does this case stand out for you?
Dinko Šakić was the last living concentration camp commander, and he was the commander for a relatively brief period of the worst concentration camp in the Balkans, a camp called Jasenovac, which was established by the independent state of Croatia, and to which thousands and thousands of Serbs, Jews, and Roma were deported, and tens of thousands of them were murdered. Mostly Serbs. The largest number of victims were Serbs, then Jews, then Roma, and it was a terrible, terrible place, horrific cruelty of the guards, horrible tortures and executions, and efforts to do everything possible to make the lives, initially the lives and later the murders of these poor victims as painful and as horrific as possible. So he had run away to Argentina because I don't know if many of our listeners probably understand or they are aware of what they call the rat lines, the escape networks of the Nazi war criminals. And this project to save the Nazi war criminals was run by an Austrian bishop named Alois Hudel, who ran a seminary in Rome. And his deputy was a Croatian priest named Krunoslav Dragonović. So among those who were enabled to escape were, for example, Dinko Šakić, but also the head of state of the independent state of Croatia, one of the biggest mass murderers of World War II, someone who basically conducted 3 genocides. A genocide attempt to murder the Serbs, the Jews, and the Roma. So Dinko Šakić was among those who ran away to Argentina, and we were able to find him with the help of Jorge Camarasa, who's an Argentinian journalist. And to be honest, he wasn't really that hard to find because he wasn't hiding and he hadn't changed his name. But when he was discovered, I mean, this guy was totally, totally unrepentant. And when Camarasa went with a TV crew to interview him, he knocks on the door, and Šakić comes to the door, and Camarasa says to him, "No, you're Dinko Šakić." He says, "Yes." So Camarasa says, "You are the commandant of Jasenovac." He says, "Yes." Normally, when Nazi war criminals are about to be discovered or exposed, there's 2 answers. One is, it's not me, mistaken identity, or it's me and I didn't do it. Dinko Šakić, it's me and I did it. And in the interview with him, he made it very clear that as far as he was concerned, there were no tortures in their Jasenovac. The mortality rate was the same as in any jail. It was only a penal colony. Every country had penal colonies. He said, if I were asked to do it again, I would do it. I sleep like a baby. I don't have any guilty conscience. It was the most horrific interview and the most shocking interview you could ever imagine. And we were very, very involved in getting him extradited to Croatia. And there was a big dilemma that we had because it wasn't clear where he should be put on trial. In other words, he could have been tried in Argentina, perhaps, in Israel, in Germany, or in the 3 countries in the Balkans of former Yugoslavia, because the camp itself was on the territory of Croatia and Bosnia, but the majority of the victims were Serbs. So I always say that if we were thinking only of the result, we would have hoped that the Serbs would have been able to extradite him, because within 5 minutes after being convicted, he'd be hanging from the highest tree in Belgrade. But our thinking always was that we want these trials to be held in the place where they're most needed. And there's no question that the people who needed the lesson of the crimes of Jasenovac and of Šakić himself personally were, of course, the Croatians, a country which many people are still sympathetic to the Ustasha. I think that they were great heroes. So we opted for Croatia, and another thing that was a problem was that the president of Croatia, the founding president of the democratic, new Croatia, was Franjo Tuđman, who had written a book. He considered himself a historian. He wrote a book called The Wastelands of Historical Reality, and he claimed that the Jews had inflated the number of victims of the Holocaust from 1 million to 6 million, and that the Jews ran Yasenovats. So, I mean, this is so absurd. I mean, it beggars description. But in any event, in the end, Croatia did seek his extradition, put him on trial, conducted the trial in a very good, respectable manner, and he was sentenced to the maximum sentence, which was 20 years, and he died in jail. But there was a lot of politics around the trial because they did not charge him with genocide, but didn't charge Šakić with genocide. And that, of course, was a political decision. And ironically, or maybe not ironically, but to give you a feeling of what we were up against, I'll tell you two stories. One is that after Šakić was extradited to Zagreb, to Croatia, and was awaiting trial, this is the summer of '98, and Croatia was competing in the Mondial, the World Football Championship, and they were doing extremely, extremely well. And on the night of July 4th, 1998, the quarterfinals match, they faced Germany. And I remember I was in Zagreb, and during the first half, I was walking to the hotel where I wanted to see the game, and all of a sudden the earth shook. So I'm wondering, what happened? Is it an earthquake? Someone told me, no, Croatia just scored a goal against Germany. Then I went to see the end of the match, and they had beaten the Germans 3-0. It was probably the biggest upset ever in World Cup history. So I went out to see the celebrations. About 3 minutes after I'm walking out there with my kippah on my head, all of a sudden I see 7 young men marching towards me with a big, huge flag. I couldn't see if it was an Ustasha flag, that's the Croatian fascists, or the Croatian flag, which is very similar to the flag of the independent state of Croatia during World War II. In any event, they're yelling at the top of their lungs, Dinko Šakić, Dinko Šakić. Now, Dinko Šakić is in jail awaiting trial for mass murder. He didn't score the goals for Croatia against Germany. So that's what we were up against, of course.
My God. And
the other story is a very, very, I would say, poignant story. One of the testimonies in the case was that I think it was in April of '44, there was a breach of discipline in the camp, and Šakić immediately called the roll call. All the inmates had to appear in the central square lineup, and he was going up and down the rows, totally arbitrarily taking out people who were going to be hung in reprisal for the breach of discipline. So one of the people that he chose was a doctor from Montenegro, it's part of Yugoslavia, named Mile Bošković. And he pointed to him, he took him out of the line, and Bošković said to him, listen, I'm from Montenegro, and my tradition doesn't allow me to be hung. So Šakić on the spot took out his pistol and shot him in the head and murdered him. And at the end of the day of the verdict, as I'm walking out, I was approached by a very well-dressed gentleman who said to me, listen, I have only one word to say to you. What's the word? The word is hvala. Hvala in Croatian is thank you. He said, without you, the trial never would have happened. But I had no idea who he was. So I asked someone, and he told me that that person was Mile Bošković's brother. In other words, the brother of Šakić's victim. And I can promise you that he never dreamt that one day there would be an independent democratic Croatia, that that country would put the great patriot, the great Ustasha, on trial, and he would get the maximum sentence. And this is something that Mr. Wiesenthal, Simon Wiesenthal, our mentor when it comes to hunting Nazis, always emphasized, which is the obligation we owe to the victims and their families to try and maximize justice and bring as many as possible of those responsible for turning innocent men, women, and children into victims, to bring them to trial and hopefully conviction and punishment.
What was that like for you to have the brother of a murdered man thank you for doing this?
It touched me. It's one of the most touching experiences I've ever had. And it's an experience that goes with me everywhere and is one of the sources of my consolation when, as often happens, unfortunately, let's say someone dies before it can be brought to justice. We had a case of a Nazi who was acquitted, totally unfairly acquitted, and things go wrong. And things very often go wrong because it's an uphill battle. And in many cases, countries don't want to prosecute. And the best way to explain it is to compare a 90-year-old Nazi to a serial killer. If a serial killer is on the loose in some normal country, the police will be on it and they'll do everything possible, because common wisdom is that these serial killers will continue to murder innocent people until they're put in jail. But what are the chances of a 90-year-old Nazi murdering someone? Well, it's never happened. So they know that all they have to do is ignore nudniks like me and other nudniks, and they'll spare themselves the expense, the embarrassment, and everything that goes along with it.